The federal government's deal to manufacture vaccines on home soil. The plan to produce millions of COVID-19 shots at a plant in Montreal in a deal with leading vaccine maker Novavax. The announcement comes as Canada's supply of vaccines, all coming from outside the country, has been slashed for the next few weeks. Will this announcement address that? François-Philippe Champagne is the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Hi, Minister Champagne. Good to see you as always. Thank you for making time for our program.
Thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
Minister, can I start off by asking you to be extremely specific on the timeline for when production of vaccines will begin? Because the Prime Minister implied it would be closer to the summer. You said later that it would be closer to the end of the year. Will there be vaccines for Canadians produced in this facility this year?
So let me be very concrete and very specific. So there's three phases: construction, certification, and production. Construction of the facility, we expect to finish around the end of the summer. Then we have a certification, which is what we call the best manufacturing practices. This is governed by Health Canada. This is for any biomanufacturing facilities in Canada. And once that certification is done, then you can move to production. That's why I said by the end of the year, because the period in between, the certification could be anything from a few weeks to a few months. But the good thing is that the big news today is that Novavax has chosen Canada to produce their vaccine. I spoke to the CEO. They could have gone in 7 or 8 other countries. They're producing in about 7 others around the world, and they chose Canada. And that, for me, is a very positive sign, because in addition, let's be clear as well, we have contracts for securing Novavax vaccine if they are approved. And now we're adding a domestic, made in Canada, by Canadian, for Canadian vaccine, so that we make sure we are resilient for the future, whatever may come.
Yeah, but the key there, I think, that I'm hoping you can expand on is the future, right? This isn't something that's going to help with our current issues with vaccines. This is something that will help at the very earliest towards the end of this year. Why wasn't something like this, some deal like this, the facility itself, why wasn't it done earlier?
What we've done, I mean, if you look, the World Health Organization declared the pandemic, March 11? And on March 23rd, the Prime Minister already announced significant investment. You have Medicago in Quebec City. We invested about $170 million. You have Vido in Saskatchewan, where we made significant investment. You have Abcelera in Vancouver. This is yet another pillar to ensure our resiliency. And I would say, Vassy, anyone who's been in the business of building plants would tell you that normally it would take 2-3 years to do that. But this is like an Apollo project. We've been pushing them. We've been working with them, investing capital. And in the case of Novavax, through our discussion and the work that has been done over months, we were able to attract them in Canada to build the pillar of resiliency that I think your viewers expect from a responsible government. This is that.
Yeah, sorry, pardon me.
Ahead.
No, finished. My apologies. I was just going to say that you're right that it does normally take 2 to 3 years. But I look, for example, to the UK, where they also announced investments in April, and they already have some vaccines manufactured there, and they'll be able to vaccinate even more people beginning this summer with their main facility. So they were able to get a production facility up and running prior to any timeline that your government has been able to do.
But we didn't start from the same base. When the pandemic started, we scouted the market in Canada with experts and leading scientists, and we didn't have the same scale in terms of manufacturing capability than the United Kingdom. That's why they are where they are today. But what we did when we saw that was really to make early investments to make sure that we would have different producers across Canada. Now, this time we bring Novavax, which in my view is a very good news, because you have one of the leading manufacturer of vaccine, which obviously has applied to be certified in Canada. And at the same time, we're continuing to have discussions with different partners around the world to build the resiliency, to make sure that whatever may come, we will be better prepared. And what I'm trying to bring is all the supply chain in Canada as much as possible to make sure that whatever may come, we are prepared and we can take care of the health and safety of Canadians. But when I hear comparison between Canada and the UK, you have to look that, pharmaceutical companies have been exiting Canada since, it started in the 1980s, different governments, different policies, different supply chain. So we started from a low base, but the investment we've made, I call that, strategic, immediate action with a long-term vision to have a very robust biomanufacturing capability in Canada in a couple of months. And that, I think, for Canadian is good news, because that's really what you want to protect your, to think that it's going to be made in Canada by Canadian for Canadian.
Respectfully, though, Minister, it's not in a few months. It's at least, most of the rest of this year before we see that production capability here domestically. And also, everything I've read about the UK was that they were actually very incapable 11 months ago of producing vaccines to the scale that they're about to produce them domestically. And just on the point of you and your ministry and your government looking at all aspects of the supply chain, again, I'd have to challenge you there, because the Globe and Mail reported, for example, that your government decided to go with the NRC facility and invest in that as a production facility versus Nuvax or other private options. Did you really put the attention to this at the time that your government should have?
Yeah, and if you go back to the UK, I just want to say, Vassy, we started with a different base. I know that they were in a similar position, but in terms of scale, they started with a higher base than ours, and that's why they are where they are and we are where we are. When you look at different manufacturers, we've been investing in different companies. The one you mentioned, we rely on advice from experts and leading minds in the countries who know about manufacturing, about technology, about the type of innovation. And we took their advice when it comes to where should we invest. And when they were looking at that, there was an issue about scale and speed, because there's been a lot of Canadian companies with great innovation, and I want them to succeed. We all want them to succeed. But when they were looking at that, where we could do our investment to have, the maximum impact in the shortest amount of time, this is what was driving in terms of having scale. Because when you're looking at Royal Mount, you're talking about 2 million doses a month. That's significant. But we're going to continue to invest. We're going to continue to work with anyone in the country who may have, therapeutics or vaccine to ensure that we are resilient for the future.
So you're saying the decision to go solely with the NRC facilities was because of advice the government received? I just want to make sure I'm clear on that, because there were also a lot of stumbling blocks with that investment, right? This was supposed to be up and running prior to when it's actually going to be up and running.
Well, there's two parts as well. When you look at the NRC, you have the clinical trials part, and you have the manufacturing line, the one that we're going to be using with Novavax. And when you're looking, it's not just the NRC, by the way. Medicago in Quebec City, we invested $173 million to build a state-of-the-art facility. If you look at Vido in Saskatchewan, the same thing. Abcellera, you're
those are all, again, a year out, minimum.
Well, I mean, it's because there's just even if you're doing an Apollo project, Vassy, anyone who's been doing in manufacturing, and I did, would tell you that to build a plant and a biomanufacturing plant, that requires a number of months. There's things you can compress, and I'm really impressed from what I've seen. Some of them are really doing work that is extraordinary. And then you have the certification, because on one end, Canadians want that to be quick, and I'm one of them. But at the same time, you want to make sure that all the safety protocol are respected. That's why I said there's always three phases: construction, certification, and production. And these companies are doing as quickly as they can. And we will continue to work with them to make the investment necessary to protect people.
And I'm certainly not taking away from the process that they have to undergo. I understand that scaling up is a big issue. But the questions that the government is facing right now about depending on a supply solely from other countries. And the question that's being asked of your government is, did you do everything possible to get to the point where there might be deals struck like the one you did today, and instead of a year from now being able to manufacture vaccines for this country and for Canadians, it could have been done a lot sooner? Can you honestly tell Canadians that you exhausted every option, including privately run labs?
Well, if you look, pandemic was declared on the 11th of March, and the 23rd of March, we were already investing. This is going to be close to, it's almost a year since we have invested. But as you said, Vassy, it takes time to build these plants. Despite the best effort of all these partners around the world and in Canada working, a year ago, we made the investment. And the Royal Mount is quite extraordinary that we're able to do that in months. I was talking to the CEO of Novavax. That's quite extraordinary. Then in a matter of months, we will be able to produce 2 million doses per month. Usually they'd say, Minister, that would take years to build. But I think with focus, with strategic investment that were done almost a year ago, because the Medicago, like I mentioned, the Vito in Saskatchewan, the Upsetter in Vancouver, those were done a year ago in terms of investments.
I get all that, but none of that stuff is going to help people right now.
Well, I think, one thing that Canadians want is that we have two streams. One is the vaccine procurement, and there the Prime Minister has been clear, everyone will be vaccinated by September. And what we're doing now is about resiliency. I mean, we have to do both at the same time. Once you want to make sure, and we have a program to vaccinate people now, but at the same time, when you look at variants and when you're looking ahead, I'm sure that the viewers are looking and say, I hope my government is making the strategic investments so that we will be best prepared, whatever may come next, whatever is the next health emergencies in months, we will be there, and we're trying to accelerate that as much as one can and with the best experts that we can find. And today, having Novavax chose Canada, to me, that's a sign of confidence that people can take away and say, we have one of the leading manufacturers who's willing to come in Canada and produce in Canada.
Okay, Minister, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. I do appreciate your time, though. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
The federal government announced a plan today, as you heard there, to produce millions of COVID-19 shots at a plant in Montreal. A deal was secured with Novavax, whose vaccine was submitted to Health Canada for regulatory approval last week. The facility, though, won't be churning out doses until the end of this year. Jagmeet Singh is the leader of the NDP. He joins us from here in Ottawa for some reaction. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Ms. Kapelos.
In your comments immediately following the announcement, you said there's no reason why the Prime Minister should not have negotiated the ability to produce both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines in this country. But the technology behind those vaccines was extremely untested. We had never developed a vaccine like that before in this country. Was it not prudent to kind of wait a little bit to see if it might actually work?
Well, what we know is that we are right now faced with a lot of uncertainty. And the uncertainty with the supply means people are worried, and they're not, and it erodes public trust. So it is vital that we have supply, that we get everyone vaccinated. And the fact that this is not negotiated in the first place in Canada is deeply concerning. We see that the supply chain issues from Europe, questions about whether we're going to receive enough vaccine, all of this could have been dealt with if we had negotiated the ability to produce it here in Canada.
But that's not necessarily true, because it's one thing to negotiate with the companies, and I take your point on that, to ensure that those vaccines can be manufactured domestically. But you have to have the facilities to be able to do that, and we won't for a little while now. So it's not as though it's just a make a deal and all of a sudden the vaccines can be produced here.
First off, we knew that vaccines were going to be a key issue a year ago. And so the preparation to be able to produce vaccines should have been the first issue that this Liberal government tackled. Right away, we knew that the light at the end of the tunnel of this pandemic was a vaccine. That was something immediately that we knew about. So why didn't Justin Trudeau take the steps necessary at the beginning of this pandemic immediately to secure the potential ability to produce the vaccine in Canada? Why don't we know about whether or not this was negotiated at all in the first place? The contracts are not made public. Other countries have done so. Other countries have provided full transparency around what was in the contracts. I don't know why Justin Trudeau didn't provide that level of clarity to Canadians, specifically when we all knew that the vaccines were the vital key to ending the pandemic.
Well, other countries, you're right, have made their contracts more publicly available, but they still remove all commercially sensitive information. I've looked through them. There's a lot of redactions. Are you okay, for example, if the government put out their contracts but redacted the same type of information?
Well, we should have some transparency. The fact that the Liberal government hasn't provided anything is problematic. And we also want to know why wasn't, or was there a reason, or was it even negotiated to be able to produce the other vaccines in Canada? We can't just assume that we didn't have the capacity. We don't even know if that was negotiated and what was in that negotiation, if there were steps we could have taken to be able to produce it here in Canada. We know for certain, Ms. Kapelos, that the lack of ability to produce the vaccine in Canada has meant that Canadians have not received vaccines. And we know that not receiving vaccines means more people will get sick and more people will die.
I take your point on manufacturing vaccines at home, but where the contracts are concerned, is it understandable to you? I mean, I've asked the question of the government. The point that they've put forth is that it might undermine their negotiating position, right? To put all that information out there, to lay out the things that you're talking about, for example, about what was negotiated and what wasn't. Is that position understandable to you?
Well, if other countries have done it, I don't understand why they can't disclose it. It's very normal to say, well, we negotiated for this or for that. If there's anything that's very sensitive, it can be redacted, of course. But the idea that the government can't let Canadians know what was negotiated does not make sense, does not hold water. Other countries have disclosed, so people know what's going on. The more we can tell Canadians about what the plan is, what's been negotiated, how we hope to achieve the goal of getting everyone vaccinated, that's just going to increase public trust, and people need to know what's going on so that we can encourage people to take the vaccine, to trust the public health advice. Without transparency, the public trust gets eroded.
I want to ask you as well about the proposition that your party has been putting forth when it comes to manufacturing vaccines, and it is that sort of a public body be responsible for it, that you take private corporations out of it. What evidence can you provide Canadians that would actually be a more effective solution to producing vaccines?
Well, we've known that it's worked in the past. In fact, in Canada, we owned a public corporation, a publicly owned entity, Crown Corporation, Connaught Labs. And it was established because at the time there was a diphtheria outbreak and the vaccines were too expensive. We started producing at home. The history of Connaught Labs is we were able to produce things like insulin, make world-leading advances, and we were able to have some of the most affordable the prices when it comes to things like insulin and access to critical drugs, which are chronically a shortage issue here in Canada. So what we're proposing is, given what we've seen being at the mercy of large pharmaceutical companies and their logistics, if we were able to produce it here in Canada with a publicly owned company where we can control the manufacture of critical drugs and of vaccines, it would put us in a better position. It would allow us to have that sovereignty, that ability to produce life-saving vaccines and critical drugs for Canadians without having to worry about the logistics that we're seeing now that are holding up issues with vaccine delivery.
In a vacuum, I understand the argument being put forth, but that company that you referred to, the endeavor here in Canada to do so, that was sold back in 1986. It ended. The world has changed so much. Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development says the average cost of bringing a medicine from invention to pharmacy shelves is now $2.7 billion. The rate of success of developing a new medicine has fallen to just 12%. Private companies can take that on in this world. Can you envision a public endeavor that could compete with that?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at what's happened in this case, there's been massive amounts of public money that have been poured into private companies that then make the innovation and then turn around and sell it to the public. So absolutely, we should make the investment. In fact, the savings that we would enjoy in the ability to keep people safe, just saving lives, the ability to continue to work if we had our own vaccine delivery and we delivered it across country, the impact on our economy, it would more than pay for itself. It is vital that we are able to produce our own vaccines, our own critical medication. It will absolutely pay for itself and actually put us in a much better position as a country, economically and in the well-being of the population.
But take, for example, some of the Canadian endeavors that have been largely publicly funded when it comes to developing a vaccine. They're far behind the private companies that were able to do so in record time.
Well, what we've seen with this vaccine development is very different. Money has been poured in from the public sector. Money has been poured in privately as well. But there's been a massive kind of global effort where everyone's been focused on this, something of the likes of which we've not seen in generations. The idea of everyone working towards a goal. The ability to produce this vaccine in our country, to develop it in our country, would be vitally important. We would not be at the mercy of these large pharmaceutical companies. The capacity to produce critical drugs would also help the well-being of Canadians in general. We know that this has worked in the past. It can absolutely work now. In fact, more than ever, we're seeing drug companies increase the price of medication year over year, gouging Canadians, gouging people. We need to be able to have control of that, and producing it ourselves would be a vital step towards having that sovereignty, that ability to protect ourselves.
Yeah, and I'm not taking away from, I think a lot of Canadians will hear that and understand, it'd be nice not to be in the position we're in right now. But I think of the outfits in this country right now that are producing their own vaccines, some of which have just entered human clinical trials. They are months behind the other vaccines like Pfizer, like Moderna, like AstraZeneca, like Johnson & Johnson, all of which are backed by big private companies, but which which have been able to develop product at a faster rate than those that are publicly funded. So will what you're proposing address the issues we face right now, or is this something that might aid us 10 years from now?
Well, certainly the fact that these big companies have produced it hasn't helped Canadians right now. Right now, we're still without access to vaccines. We're
That's
still
not
without
true.
the ability.
We have access to vaccines.
Well, let's think about it effectively. Effectively, do we have all the vulnerable people in Canada access to vaccines? Are all the seniors in long-term care vaccinated? Are the frontline workers vaccinated? Do we have enough vaccine to even vaccinate all the frontline workers?
No, you're right,
or
but we don't have no
most vulnerable people. So it doesn't matter if a company has produced it if it's not actually in the arms of people. And that's really what's critical here. At the end of the day, the Liberals talk a lot about announcements of vaccines, maybe production in the future. If we're not getting vaccines into people's arms, if people aren't getting vaccinated, people aren't safe. We aren't saving lives. And that's why it's so critical that we talk about how we get people vaccinated. And the fact that if we could have produced this here in Canada, would have been far better in the beginning.
I totally understand your point on the speed. I'm just saying it's not like there's no vaccines. I get what you're saying. Not everybody who needs it is vaccinated, though. I take your point. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Singh. I appreciate your time as always.
Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Vassy Kapelos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.